up to doing sanitizers like so many distillers have?
We did. We produced about 25,000 gallons of hand sanitizer for first responders and for churches and for kids clinics and medical clinics in the Gillespie County, Blanco County area. Also we had police. It was kind of a cool situation. We had policemen driving in from West Texas to get it because they were running out. Nobody had hand sanitizer at the time. We never charged for it, but we did set up a little GoFundMe operation so that anybody that wanted some hand sanitizer and wanted to pay for it, we're not going to charge them for it because we're just doing what we think is best for the world, right? It's totally philanthropic.
Sure.
So instead, what we did is we set up this little GoFundMe page, and anybody that wanted to donate, whether it's $5 or $10 or $50 or $1,000, could go to that site and make a donation. And I think about $3,000 was raised for the production of hand sanitizer. We actually spent about $25,000 of our own money producing the hand sanitizer.
Well, fantastic.
It was called Wash Your Damn Hands. Is that what it's called?
It's called Wash Your Damn Hands. And you know what? I'd do it again tomorrow because I had the honor and privilege of walking into churches and old folks' homes and clinics and handing this stuff out to everybody. To hospitals, Seton Hospital in Austin, Dell Hospital in Austin. They all got hand sanitizer, and I got to deliver it to them. And I'd get big hugs and kisses from everybody while I was there. So it was really a nice thing to do and a fun thing to do. It was great for me. It was very rewarding.
That's awesome.
Cool. So tell us how you got into the bourbon business.
I was working in software back in 2001 when the internet bubble exploded. And I had a couple of thousand shares in a pretty pricey company that had gone big. And we had just sold the company. And all of a sudden, boom, Enron collapses. And Enron was the largest client that we had for that software. So they went bankrupt. The company went bankrupt. All those shares that I thought I was going to retire on and buy a boat in the Caribbean, they completely disappeared. And here I was in my midlife crisis. I'm 40 years old, and I'm looking at myself going, what the hell are you going to do with your life now? Because nobody was hiring in technology in Austin, Texas in 2001. The internet was done at that point in time, or at least it's come roaring back now, but it's taken a long time. So I was laying in bed one night and I'm reading a newspaper article. I'm one of these old timers that still reads a newspaper. Do y'all know what that is? That's the paper thing that has all the words on it.
I've seen
with the crosswords, right?
Yeah, with the crosswords. So I'm reading a story about a guy who's going to create another vodka. So now you've got Tito's in Texas, you've got Dripping Springs in Texas, and this guy's going to create a new one. And I turn to my wife and I'm giving her shit because, by the way, can I say shit on your show?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I'm giving my wife shit because she drinks a lot of vodka. And I said, why would anybody open up a distillery and make vodka? Why don't they make something that tastes good like bourbon? And she said, well, as much of that stuff as you drink, maybe you should. We'd probably save money. So the next thing you know, I'm in Kentucky, and I'm taking the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. And I'd already done a little research, so I knew good and well that you could make bourbon anywhere in the United States you wanted to, but nobody had ever done it before outside of Kentucky. And I thought, why is that? And I thought, what better place than Central Texas to make good bourbon whiskey? Because we're loyal to the core in Texas. We like our brands. We fall in love with brands. We worship brands. And you see it from Tito's. You see it from Shiner Bock beer. You see it from Pabst Brewery in the old days. You know, we have brands that develop here in Texas and that have loyal followers. So I thought, if I can really figure this shit out, then I might have a real business on my hands.
Yeah. So, see, that's interesting. I didn't know that. I thought that when I first saw this, I thought, don't they only do bourbon in Kentucky? I thought maybe it was like Scotch, could only be brewed in Scotland and
Providence.
Champagne.
Yeah.
Exactly. Everybody thought that. The first probably 100 liquor stores I walked into with a bottle of bourbon to pour for the proprietor, and I'd say, hey, you want to try some bourbon whiskey that I make here in Texas? And they'd say to me, you can't make bourbon in Texas. And they'd just tell me to get the hell out of the store. But once they started pouring it for them, it started working.
Yeah. Now, it does have some rules around it, right, though?
It does.
What is classified as bourbon?
one of my oldest, dearest friends, he passed away a couple of years ago, but he was the guy that really got me excited about making bourbon. His name was Dave Pickerel. He was the master distiller at Maker's Mark in Kentucky. And I called one morning and I said, hey, I'm going to be coming by for a tour of Maker's Mark. Can I sit down and talk to Dave Pickerel? I'm thinking there's not a chance in hell that the real Dave Pickerel is going to talk to me. And he spent an hour and 15 minutes answering my questions. And he taught me the rules of bourbon, and we call them the ABCs. A, it has to be American made. B, it has to use a new barrel every single time to be aged in. You can't reuse your barrels over and over again. C, it has to have at least 51% corn content in your mash bill. Our recipe is 74% corn, 15% soft red winter wheat, and 11% barley. D stands for distillation proof. When that bourbon comes off the still, it's in a form called White Dog, and it looks a lot like vodka. Thank God it doesn't taste like vodka. But it has to come off that still at 160 proof or lower. If it's 160 proof or higher, you can go work for my friend Tito Beverage because you're no longer making bourbon whiskey. E is entry proof. When you enter that bourbon into the barrel, it's got to go into the barrel at 125 proof or lower. So we add rainwater that we collect from all of our barns and buildings at the distillery, and we use that rainwater to proof the bourbon down, to bring it down to 94 proof before it goes into a bottle. And it's got to be 125 proof before it goes into a barrel. So the F in the alphabet is fill proof, which is it's got to be 80 proof or higher to be bourbon whiskey. And then G is the last letter in the alphabet, and that stands for genuine. You're not allowed to use any vanilla. You're not allowed to use any caramel coloring. No red dye number 4. No red dye number 7. You can't put ethylene glycol in it, like a lot of whiskeys contain, for flavor and for that bite. Bourbon's got to be pure, and it's got to be authentic, and it's got to be real.
So I was reading, and you had started out with corn from the Panhandle.
Yes, sir.
You had a friend from Whole Foods and said the Panhandle had the best corn. And on your second trip up there, you go, oh my God, it's white corn. And you kind of,
sort of
instead of driving back, you went ahead and tried it. So are you still doing white corn?
How prescient that you would ask that question, because one of the friends that I have up here in Colorado that I was hiking with all day yesterday was my friend who used to work for Whole Foods. And she was, I think, the procurement director. And I picked up the phone one day and I called her. This was when I was still in the planning stages of the business. And I said, Betsy, can you help me out? I want to buy the highest quality corn here in Texas. She's buying from Texas farmers for her stores. And she recommended a place in Dalhart, Texas called Deef Smith County Grain. And I'm sure it's changed names and hands a couple of times since then. But I got in my truck and I drove up there and I bought 4 bags of corn, 4 50-pound bags of their Panhandle yellow dent corn. And I came back and I used those for practice batches when I was trying to work the still and trying to figure out how to do the cook process and to operate the still and the fermentation process. I was trying to get all of the chemical processes down pat. And so that's what I was using that corn for. And it got to a point where I was distilling, three times a day. I would do a one distillation in the morning, one in the afternoon, and one at night. And I hired these 2 guys, part-timers, to come up and help me out. And we would go in shifts. I would do the first shift from in the morning up until 4 o'clock, and then another guy would take over the still and do the second shift. And then another guy would do the night shift on the still. So we were doing basically 24 hours a day distillations. And so we needed a lot more corn. And placed an order for a truck to bring it down from the Panhandle for us, and it showed up and it was white corn instead of the yellow dent that I'd been doing all my distilling with. And I called up Deaf Smith County Grain and I said, hey, y'all sent me the wrong stuff. Can you come pick this up and take it back to the Panhandle and send me the yellow corn I've been using? And they said, that's going to cost more money than you're going to need to spend to make that happen. So they said, go ahead and just keep it and we'll send you another truckload. And sure enough, I did the fermentation process. I did a number of cooks using that white corn, and all of a sudden I was getting 20% bricks, which is the sugar content in the mash, the sweet mash that we use to make our bourbon from. It's basically Distillers beer is what it's called. But 21% sugar content, that's unheard of in Kentucky. And I kind of jumping out of my skin. I was so excited because every distillery I knew in Kentucky, the highest bricks level they could ever get was 13-14%, and here I'm getting 21% off Texas corn.
So, okay, so obviously the guys in Kentucky had to go, wait a minute, how are you doing this? Has anyone switched to white corn? Or is this exclusively Garrison Brothers?
You know, they tried. I think I made a lot of friends in Kentucky over the years, and I think they've appreciated the fact that we've done it authentically. We don't buy bourbon from somebody else and put a Texas label on it and say that we made it ourselves. And there's a lot of that shit going on all over the country right now. So I think I've made a lot of friends in Kentucky. None of them have ever shared whether they've used white corn versus yellow dent corn. But most of it's feed grade up there in Kentucky. It's the same stuff you feed to your wildlife or your cows or your hogs, because that's how bourbon became what it is. It's easier to store a barrel of bourbon than it is a barrel of corn, because you're going to get insects in it. You're going to get mold. If there's too much wetness inside of it, the mold will kill it all. But if it's turned into bourbon, then you've got a product that you can sell and trade for other commodities. And that's how bourbon became what it is today in America.
Nice.
So do you show reruns of Dukes of Hazzard?
That's really funny that you asked me that, because I just got a phone call last week from a guy who is a chef out of Houston, and I think John Schneider was Bo Duke. Anyway, he had just done a catering event for John Schneider at his ranch, and they wanted to do an event, a Garrison Brothers bourbon dinner at my distillery. So who knows? I may be able to meet Bo Duke pretty soon.
That's awesome.
So, how long does it age in the barrel?
Our first release was just 1 year old. It was a baby. We called it the Young Gun. That was on Texas Independence Day, March 2nd of 2010, and that was 1,000 bottles that went out. And we did it as a 1 year old. I hated doing it as a 1 year old. And the reason I hated it is that straight bourbon has to be aged a minimum of 2 years. And I wanted to make the best bourbon in the world when I started this operation. There was never any intent to make something cheap or make something that people might chug or drink like a shot. I want them to savor this bourbon, and I wanted it to be the best it could be. So I wanted to make it at least 2 years old before we bottled it. But then we heard about this guy who was going to release a whiskey in Texas before us, even though we'd been producing bourbon for years at that point in time. This guy was a startup. He just started his business, and he was going to release it into the marketplace, and it was only like 3 months old. And that really pissed me off. So I said, after all the hard work that I've put into this business, after all the blood, sweat, and tears that we've gone through, numerous almost bankruptcies over the years, and this guy's going to get to market before I am, that pissed me off. So I released it anyway. Turns out he'd already sold a couple of cases to some retailer in Waco anyway, so he still beat me to the punch.
Is he still around?
Uh-huh. Well, he's not, but his brand is.
Okay.
So when you started out at the beginning, you're making this stuff, but you don't, so you make a batch and then you don't even get to try your first batch for a year?
Well, I would put the barrels out I bought one of those metal transatlantic shipping containers for like $3,000, and that was my first barrel barn. And I would put a barrel in it every single day of whatever batch I had made that day. And I would taste them. I had a set schedule where I would taste the barrels at 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and a year initially. And then once we raised a little money from friends and family to expand the operation, we were able to age it much longer. So today, every bottle of Garrison Brothers is a minimum of 4 years old. Most of the bourbon that's out there is anywhere from 4 to 7 years old.
Okay.
So talk about your barrel barns. I was reading about how the Kentucky guys have to rely on the height that they stack the barrels for the heat. And, obviously in Texas, heat is not a problem.
Right. Well, in any structure, heat rises to the top, right? And especially if you've got a blazing sun shining down on the roof, that's going to be the hottest part of the barn. So any distiller who knows his business is going to pull barrels from the top of the barn that he wants to submit for awards competitions, because those barrels are going to be thicker. They're going to have more of the sap that comes from the sugars that are in the wood. They're just going to be tastier. They're also going to be a lot less empty, a lot more empty, because the angel share, evaporation from the barrel is higher in the warehouse at higher points than it is at the lowest point in the warehouse. My lowest barrels in my rick house, in any of my rick houses, are always going to be the ones that are very lower proof, and they're going to have more liquid in them than the barrels that are at the top. Barrels at the top can be upwards of 140, 145 proof after 4 or 5 years of aging, but they'll be only a quarter full. Hence the release of our Cowboy Bourbon that we do every single year.
Right.
That Cowboy Bourbon is coming from those best barrels, and it's delicious, and it's very high proof.
Yeah, I understand people line up at dawn for your Cowboy.
The last Balmorhea release, I still have regret. We only released 500 bottles from the distillery. We sold obviously to distributors. We're actually sold in 35 states today. So we sell it out to the distributors, and then we have the release party at the distillery where our fans and followers can come pick up their own bottles, usually at a lot lower price than they can get them in retail. But we'll keep
the secret is safe with us.
So the one we had for Balmorhea, which I think was May 28th, we had cars there at 4:45 in the morning. By 7 o'clock in the morning, we weren't even going to open our gates until 10 o'clock to let them in. By 7 o'clock in the morning, we had 329 cars and trucks lined up High Albert Road. And these guys are so awesome. They bring their own lawn chairs. They're playing poker out there in the middle of High Albert Road, waiting for us to open the gates. And finally, the county sheriff, we were almost backed up to Highway 290, which is 1.7 miles away. And the cars were actually backing up on Highway 290, and the county sheriff came by and said, "Garrison, you open those gates." And we did it. We sold all 504 bottles in about 2 hours.
Nice.
So the barrels you use, I saw something too about those being, you have to char them, but you said you could only use them once, right?
Correct. We resell our barrels to a lot of different winemakers. Winemakers can use barrels. In fact, I talked to a guy today. His name's Chris, and he's over at Lost Draw Vineyards, and he's put a Sangiovese wine into Garrison Brothers barrels that he's been aging, I think, for 6 months. And my first question for him right out of the box was, because I know we gave him some really wet barrels, meaning that there was still a lot of bourbon in that wood. And I said, "Okay, what's the alcohol by volume of the wine?" And he said 16.9%. That's a strong wine, and that means that there's a lot of bourbon in it.
Nice.
My wife likes Lost Straw. I just want to say, she's familiar with that.
I'm curious what that does to the flavor. It's interesting. Go ahead.
So I was going to ask, what are the factors that affect a particular stock? I mean, you mentioned heat. You mentioned the barrels. Airflow, do you rotate them? What are the factors?
The winds are really picking up, guys, so I'm going to step inside here for just a second and
Okay.
continue the conversation there. So the summers in Texas have the greatest effect on our barrels, for sure, because the heat causes that bourbon to expand into the wood. And then when it gets cooler in the morning, it comes back out of the wood, and it's extracting the sugars from the sap from the white American oak barrels. And those sugars are called diacol, oak lactone, vanillin, isoeugenol, eugenol, furfural. Those sugars are from the sap in the tree. And that sugar sweetens the bourbon. It gives it all of its caramel flavor, all of that butterscotch that you taste when you taste Garrison Brothers. That's coming from the sap in the wood. That's the primary factor. About 15% of the taste of bourbon comes from the actual white dog. The white dog is the bourbon before it's gone into a barrel.
Okay.
Cool.
So, what can you tell us about your Red Fridays? I saw something about that on your website.
Red Friday is I have a bunch of military guys that work for me. They seem to work harder than the rest of the world, and they're incredibly well disciplined. And I am the first in 4 generations not to go into the Navy, so maybe I have a little bit of regret for not having served my time like everybody else did. So I've always hired veterans, and one of the things that we have on a given Friday, on every Friday, is what we call Red Friday. And Red Friday stands for Remember Everyone Deployed, and we all have red T-shirts on. And every single time we're bottling and someone comes through the bottling line, we will raise a toast and raise it up to the veterans who are serving all over the world for keeping us safe here in America.
Nice.
Nice. I also read about you have a volunteer bottling program.
Yeah, we sure do. It's a great bunch of people too. They're nuts. They come from all over the United States. We've even got people that come in from Canada to volunteer bottle with us. It's a great time. We start about 8:30 in the morning. We feed them breakfast, which is almost always biscuits and gravy, because we're healthy out there, you know. And they're just wonderful people. They're so excited to be there. They'll come in groups of 5 or 6, and they stay and they work until about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And every half hour or so, we give them a shot of courage just to keep them motivated throughout the day. And it's something to watch, because you get there in the morning and everybody's quiet and everybody looks a little nervous and they're all staring at the other people that are in the room. And you'll have this one guy that's got tattoos all over his body, and this other guy's got piercings in his ears and nose, and everybody's a little reluctant. They're not real sure what to do with all these freaks. And by noon, they're all dancing with each other and exchanging phone numbers and exchanging email addresses and making dinner plans for the evening. So it's one of the things that we do that I love the most, and I miss it so much. COVID has ruined for us one of the greatest aspects of our business, which was the camaraderie and the friendships and the followers that we have, and telling legendary stories. Every once in a while, somebody will stand up on the table, the bottling line table, and tell a story, a great story. And that's what bourbon's all about. And I really miss having people there at the distillery. All of my staff right now is doing all the bottling for us, because we just don't want to have my staff exposed to anybody that might have COVID.
How many bottles do you process a week?
It depends how drunk the crew's really good. We typically shoot to do at least 1,000 bottles a day, and what that means is you're putting the cork in it, you're writing the data information on the side of the bottle with a silver Sharpie, you're dipping the bourbon into the wax so that it seals that neck of the bottle, and you're putting a tear strip on it, which is we use deerskin lace for our tear strips. And it's monotonous, but it's fun and it's therapeutic. It's hard to explain unless you've done it.
All right. Well, we'll be out there as soon as we can.
I hope so.
Speaking of out there, for any of the listeners who don't know, High is on the right between Johnson City and Fredericksburg, correct?
That is correct. It's 10 miles past Johnson City, on the way from Austin to Fredericksburg. Right.
So how did you wind up in High?
I have some old friends who have a small farm in Stonewall, Texas. And Stonewall, if you've ever been there, it's this real quaint, quiet ranching community. And they had a little place that was right there on the Pedernales. And we used to go out there. My entire family would go out there and we'd spend a weekend with them. And it was always the same weekend. It was the third weekend in June, which happens to be the Stonewall Peach Parade and Rodeo. Stonewall is literally 2 miles from High. And it was such a great time. I mean, it's the greatest slice of Americana. That rodeo, you got the boys in their tight Wrangler jeans with the Copenhagen can stuck in the back pocket, and they got their hats on, and they got their big old belt buckles, and they're showing off for the girls. And all the girls are in their Daisy Dukes, and they've got the plaid shirts on. And there's the rodeo peach queens, and they're just all dolled up in these beautiful dresses. And it's a slice of heaven. And I always knew that if I ever bought some land or if I ever was to retire, I wanted to be somewhere near Stonewall, Texas, so I could participate in that every year and get to know those people. These are the types of folks that pull over on the side of the road and they help you change a tire. They're salt of the earth. We've had some 18-wheelers come out to our distillery and drive off the road into the grass and get stuck in, delivering barrels or delivering bottles. And within an hour, 3 tractors will show up and they'll pull that sucker out. It's a great community. It's a friendly community, very conservative, and old fashioned.
Well, you certainly sound like a native Texan. Tell us about your early years.
Sure. I actually wasn't born in Texas. My wife is 5th generation Texan, but I was a Navy brat. And my dad was in the service. He was in submarines. And he was a navigator for a submarine. So I was born in Bremerton, Washington. And then my dad left the Navy, retired from the Navy and he went to Harvard Business School. And so I spent my early years up in Boston, Massachusetts. And then we moved. His first job after he got out of business school was in Houston, Texas. So I grew up in Houston. I was in Houston from basically the second grade all the way up until high school, and then went to high school in Dallas because my parents divorced and split up, and I ended up in Dallas as opposed to Houston. Graduated from a school in Dallas called the Episcopal School of Dallas. I was in the first class there, and immediately transferred to the University of Texas for my college education. And once I got to Austin, I said, oh shit, this place is great. Nobody's getting me out of here. I graduated from the University of Texas in 1989 and moved to New York City. I did 3 years in New York City, and then I get this call from this girl named Nancy who says, hey, I was at the University of Texas the same time you were, and a sorority sister of mine, Kappa Kappa Gamma sorority, said I should look you up because I'm doing a lot of business in New York. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, first of all, she's from Texas, so she's probably smoking hot. Second of all, she's in the Kappa Kappa Gamma sorority, so she's probably smoking hot and rich. And third, she's got the cojones to call me up and ask me out on a blind date, sight unseen, when I'm 25 years old. And I had some serious issues when I was 25 years old. So we went out. I fell madly in love and moved back to Texas 6 months later.
Oh, that's awesome.
So, yeah, you're one of the lucky few who actually graduated and got to stay here. I mean, usually everybody's fighting to stay here, but they have to give up and go somewhere else to get a job. You know, it used to be, not as much anymore.
Yeah, it's changed a lot, hasn't it?
Yep.
But I was on the 6-year plan at the University of Texas because I didn't want to leave.
Why rush it?
Heck yeah, I'd go back to work if they'd let me.
You know, if we only knew that our time at college was going to be the best times of our lives, I don't think we would have worked so hard.
Yeah, nobody told us that part.
Yeah.
So, do you feel like being in high is an advantage for what you're doing?
It's definitely an advantage. Distilling is a very dangerous industry because you're dealing with high proof alcohol. It's flammable. Your electrical outlets all need to be explosion proof. There's a fire code in almost every major city that you have to build your structure to that code. And that code is really strict for distilleries because they have to have sprinklers all in the building. You have to have enough water in the building to put out a major fire if it was to happen. And it has to happen quickly. They make you overbuild your security systems in case of a fire. And so in the country, there's no code. There's no inspector. There's nothing you don't have to follow the rules until you get to 11 employees. Then once you get to 11 employees, then you're under OSHA guidelines and you have to meet OSHA guidelines. And I'm proud to say, I think we're probably the first craft distillery in America that has this year, because of COVID, has become OSHA compliant. And it took a lot of hard work, but what the hell else are we going to do, right? We can't sell. We can't produce bourbon because we need our production team on the bottling line. So we decided we'd get OSHA compliant. We busted our asses and did it.
Nice.
So talk about the process of being the first legal bourbon distiller. Obviously, you had to go through the government, and that would faze a mortal man.
The reality is, when I started this, I was one of the first ones. We were the first whiskey distillery in Texas history, as far as anyone knows. And it was a different age. There weren't lawyers accustomed to dealing with distilleries and getting distilleries the correct paperwork or permits that they needed to have. So you have to start first with the federal agency that monitors distilled spirits, and that's called the Tax and Trade Bureau out of Cincinnati, Ohio. The Tax and Trade Bureau was formerly the TTB. I'm sorry, it is the TTB, but it was formerly known as the Bureau of Alcohol and Tobacco, which got a pretty bad reputation after the Koresh compound situation and a lot of other Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, disasters. So that was the first organization that I had to get a permit from. And I probably submitted my paperwork to them about 14 times. And I did it all myself. I didn't hire a lawyer. I didn't have the money to hire a lawyer. I was building the business off credit cards just like Tito did. And so one day it came in the mail. My permit approved and with a stamp on it from the federal government. I went, oh shit, this is really happening. And then the next part of the process, once you had the federal permit, then you can apply for the state permit. And I didn't know how that was going to go because I knew the vodka operations are totally different from a whiskey distillery. You can call 1-800-VODKA and a tanker trailer will show up with vodka in it tomorrow if you want to today. It's real easy to get into the vodka business. With a bourbon whiskey distillery, you have to have cookers, you have to have fermentation tanks, you have to have pumps, you have to have hydrometers to measure the proof of everything. You have to keep an unbelievable amount of records. And I knew that I was going to have trouble over at the TABC, Texas Alcohol Beverage Commission, because they had to approve my plant just like the feds had approved my plant. And I'll never forget the lady that came out from the federal department. She said, I've never been to a whiskey distillery before. What should I ask you? I don't know what you should ask me. Just tell me I'm approved. And she did. But the TABC, I actually took the former director of the TABC out to lunch. We went to the county line and got some barbecue. And I said, look, here's what I'm going to do. I don't want to be pushing the TABC and getting pushed back when I apply for my permit. His name was Alan Steen. He actually works for Glazers today. And Alan was very helpful. He was incredibly helpful. He put the right people in touch with me. He showed me how to apply for a label approval through the TABC, and he was actually very helpful. So I was very pleased with the TABC helping me get through it. I think it probably took 2 years to get all the permits in place so that I could actually legally operate a still. And during that 2 year time, I may have operated a still illegally, but the statute of limitations should have run out by now.
Yeah. So you were just practicing your craft up to that point.
Yeah. Well, how else do you do it?
You got to learn.
It's illegal to own or operate a still in America unless you have a federal permit. Well, how do you get a federal permit without knowing how to operate a still? It's a catch-22.
The government.
Yeah.
You must be the only person I've ever heard have a positive experience with the TABC.
The current leadership over there is sensational. And the TABC's hands are tied because our lawmakers write the legislative code. And they often do so without considering the impact of that legislative code. And it can be dangerous and it can be costly. And it's frustrating. TABC doesn't even know their own rules. They don't even know how a distillery should operate. And yet they're asked to enforce that. Makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. So I think they're good people over there. We work very closely with them. We've formed the Texas Whiskey Association. We formed the Texas Distilled Spirits Association. And we work very closely with TABC to try to bring some common sense to alcohol distribution in Texas. But think of it this way. The best example of how nonsensical it is that did you know that you can order marijuana online and have it shipped to your home?
No.
Did not know that.
You can. It's easy to do in many states and many countries. But in Texas, you can't even order a bottle of distilled spirits and have it shipped to your home. You have to go to a liquor store and make the purchase at the liquor store. And I can't ship you a bottle. If you were living in Nebraska, I'm sorry, that's not a good example. Let's say Ohio. We don't distribute our bourbon in Ohio today. So you would go online and you would just place an order for it and we would ship you the bottle to Ohio. Well, that's illegal all across the United States of America. And it makes absolutely no sense. And the only reason it is illegal is because the retailers want to make sure that they get their 35% cut every single time that they sell it.
Sure.
Yeah, it's like the auto dealerships in Texas.
Exactly.
Yeah. So when did you first taste bourbon? When did you have your first taste of bourbon?
I was drinking bourbon in high school. All my friends drank beer and margaritas, but I was a W.L. Weller 12-year-old kid, and I'd mix it with Coke back in those days, or Diet Coke, or club soda. Today, all I drink is bourbon and soda, or bourbon neat. So I've always been kind of a bourbon geek, and I collected bottles in the days, little antique bottles that I had a whole shelf of all these antique bottles that I buy at
flea market?
Flea markets, yeah. And so I had all these collections of bottles, and there was one particular bottle that looks just like mine. Coincidentally, it was the second bottle that Jack Daniel's ever released back in the 1800s, I believe, and that was the design that came for the Garrison Brothers bottle.
Nice. So I do some work with Rob Cordes, who's just a fabulous guy. He was telling me about your single barrel program, which sounded absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, Rob Cordes has been my best friend, one of my best friends for a very long time. We used to have our own advertising agency back in the days that we did some work for a lot of clients in Austin, and we've always worked really well together. It's this strange ability to not even talk about a project, but still understand what the other person's thinking. I say, Rob, let's do it this way. And he gets it and he puts it on paper and it looks beautiful just the way I imagined it. So we've always had a great relationship. The single barrel program, I was in New York City and I was working with my distributor up there, and we had gone from liquor store to liquor store to liquor store to liquor store. And suddenly my phone rings while we're having lunch at this McDonald's up in Harlem. And my phone rings, and I look down at the phone, and it says David B. Trone. And I went, wow, I know that name. Oh, my God, that's the president of Total Wine & More, the largest liquor retailer in the country. At the time, I think they had 70 stores. Now they have well over 300 stores. And Mr. Trone, I picked up the phone. I said, hi, Mr. Trone. How may I help you? It's Dan Garrison with Garrison Brothers. He says, yes, sir. I want you to do a private label bourbon for me. I've tasted your juice, and it's absolutely fantastic. And I want you to call it, what's the name of your son? And I said, my son is Sam Garrison. So we'll call it Sam's Bourbon, and we'll sell it at all my stores. But I'm going to need you to give me a bottle for about $14 a piece. That way I can mark it up to $28 and make a good profit off of it. And I said, Mr. Trone, I don't do that. There's no way I could create a bottle of Garrison Brothers Bourbon or my son's bourbon or whatever you want to call it for $14. The ingredients alone that go into the bourbon are $14 per bottle. And I said, I got another idea, though. We've been talking about doing a single barrel program where you and your team from Total Wine & More might come to High and taste a whole bunch of different barrels. And when you find the ones you like, we'll ship those barrels or all the liquid that comes from those barrels to all of your stores, and we'll call it Garrison Brothers Single Barrel. And he said, fantastic. I'll have it set up, and I'm going to need 300 barrels by next month. And I went, oh, shit. And I picked up the phone, and I called my master distiller, and I said, we got to get 300 barrels to Total Wine & More. Do we even have that much in our inventory? My master distiller started pumping barrels out. We worked night and day to continue to fill barrels so that we could get the old ones out. And the next thing you know, we had Garrison Brothers Single Barrel Bourbon in all Total Wine & More stores across the United States, and we still do today. It's been a great partnership with them. We also have great relationships with Twin Liquors right there based in Austin. Specs out of Houston's fantastic to work with. So we've been very lucky to have some retailers that have supported the business along the way.
Fantastic.
So, being a long-time Austin resident, this is where we're going to find out a little more about you here. So what's been your favorite Austin experience since you've been here since college? You've had a few.
Probably the trail, the Town Lake Trail. I moved my first apartment in Austin when I was going to the University of Texas was at Infield at Exposition. So I was maybe a mile from the Town Lake Trail, and I was a big runner in those days. I would run 5, 6, 7 times a week and was logging 35, 40 miles a week back then. So I spent so much time on the trail. And when I lost that job in technology, the software job, when Enron collapsed, one of the things that I was running marathons at the time. I ran 3 marathons before I decided to quit running. And I was always down at the trail training for these marathons. And it kind of pissed me off. I'd run by a trash can and there was just trash all over the place. It was clear that the Parks Department hadn't emptied the trash in weeks. There were trailheads that had no signage showing you where to go. There were invasive weeds and trees all over Town Lake, formerly Town Lake, now Lady Bird Lake. And I was ticked off. And my friend Will Wynn happened to be the mayor at the time. And I went to Will and I said, hey, I think I can raise some money to do some good things for the trail, to create kind of a Central Park conservancy for the Town Lake Trail. And I had a lot of time because I had no job and I had no money coming in. So I formed this thing called the Town Lake Trail Foundation, which today is called the Trail Foundation. And we raised a couple of $1 million, and we started rebuilding restrooms along the trail. We started doing volunteer cleanup projects. We would plant gardens all the way along the trail for people to enjoy. And everybody that would run by would look over at us. We had our Town Lake Trail Foundation T-shirts on, and they'd drop money in a bucket while we're out there planting things. Everybody wanted to. That was Austin to a T. Everybody loves the trail. The trail is a meeting point for everybody, no matter what your race is, ethnicity, color of your skin, whether you're liberal or whether you're Democrat or whether you're Republican. None of that matters on the trail. And so I've always loved the Town Lake Trail. And when I think of Austin, that's what I think about.
That's awesome. That's great.
Yeah, that could be rewarding to have done that work on it.
It is. It's great to see things like the Riverside Boardwalk, the boardwalk that runs over east of Congress. That was a dream of mine. Oh my God, I worked for 7 years to make that happen, and it finally happened, and it was miraculous.
Excellent, Joel. You had.
Yeah, I was just okay. I've had several jobs as a salesman, right? What was it like with your first walking into the first liquor stores, saying, "Hey, I made this. What do you think?"
So, the corruption of this industry is everywhere. If you think back to Prohibition, the distilling industry came out of Prohibition, and the laws were put in place to assure that the bedlam of Prohibition didn't happen again. So one of the laws, for example, in Texas, is if I want to go into a liquor store and I want to present my bottle to the owner of the liquor store, I have to be accompanied by my distributor. Well, my distributor doesn't want to sell Garrison Brothers. He wants to sell 45 cases of Jim Beam because he gets a commission on that. So trying to get the distributor to allocate one of their individuals to accompany you into the store to make the sale was a huge pain in the ass and ridiculous. So I pretended I didn't know the rules, and I went in and did it anyway. And I think Tito had beat me to that. Tito had been doing that a long time. He'd been walking into liquor stores and saying, "Hey, try my vodka." And no question, Tito started it all. And I wouldn't have been able to walk into those liquor stores and promote my brand if Tito hadn't done what he did, 5 years before me. So he's become a good friend over the years, and I really admire what he's done. But the sale itself was difficult because my bourbon is $79 to $129 a bottle. It's expensive stuff. We use the highest quality grains. We use the highest quality barrels. It's all done by hand. It's not an automated procedure. Everything that's coming out of Kentucky today is automated. It's all mechanical. They don't even have people on their bottling line anymore. It's all done by machines. And so my bourbon's really expensive. And people would just laugh at me. "You're going to make bourbon in Texas. You're going to try to charge me $79 for it?" Well, we showed them now because we've won every award out there. We've been the American Whiskey of the Year 4 times in Jim Murray's Whiskey Bible, which is kind of the most prestigious award. We won double gold at the San Francisco Wine and Spirits competition, which is the most prestigious one in the world. And we've made a great product. And once people taste Garrison Brothers, it's really difficult to step back to their Kentucky bourbon they used to be drinking because it just tastes different. It's got 3 to 4 times the amount of the sugars from the sap in the wood than any Kentucky bourbon.
Awesome.
So, what do you do on your time off around here?
Well, this week I'm in Colorado hiking with my family and friends, which is awesome. I really don't get time off as such. I mean, I own the business, so I feel like I'm obligated to be there just about every single day. I try to take Sundays off, but it never really works out that way. Part of the process is getting out and selling it. We've just expanded during COVID from 26 states in America to 35 states. So there are now 9 new states that I need to get out and I need to visit. And I need to meet all the liquor store owners. And I need to shake hands with the bartenders that will be serving our product. And I need to tell them all about it. I need to pour them a sample. And that's the sales part of running your own business. You got to be willing to go do that. And if you're not willing to put your boots out on the streets, then nobody's going to even be aware of your product. So I'm going to do that. And I'm actually leaving on Saturday for a basic 4-week sales trip where I'll be going to Nebraska, which is a new state for us, Oklahoma, which is a new state for us, New Mexico, if they'll let me in without quarantining. And then I'm going to do a whole trip down to the west coast of Texas and then to Louisiana after that. So I'll be on the road for about 40 days selling bourbon.
Do you have field reps?
And you know what? I don't mind that. That's okay with me. Oh. It's the greatest job in the world. I get to meet new people every single day and have a drink of good bourbon with them. That's awesome. Nobody else gets to do that. So am I sad that I don't have time off for hobbies? Hell no. I love what I do.
That's awesome. So do you have field reps, or do you rely on local distributors in all these 35 states?
All the distributors have reps, but they really don't pay much attention to the smaller brands like mine. The Diageos of the world, the Pernod Ricards of the world, the Moet Hennessy's of the world. Those are the big liquor companies across the world that pay money to the distributors to get their products slotted into the right stores or the right bars. And we can't do that. We can't compete with those kind of advertising and marketing budgets. We're doing this all by ourselves. We're fiercely independent. We tend to stay that way. So I think I lost track of your question.
I was wondering, how do you have field reps? Do you have people on your payroll that are out there pushing your product?
We do. We have about 4 people in California right now. We have 2 people in Florida that represent our brand and only our brand, and they work directly for me. And we have about 10 people in Texas who are out pushing the brand. We're probably going to put people in New York, our own people in New York in the next year or 2. New York is a big bourbon market, so we want to be there. In addition to my team that goes out and does the selling, we have reps that work for the different distributors in every state. And these reps do call on accounts, but it's very rare that they're going to call on an account to sell Garrison Brothers because they've got 20 other bottles of liquor in their bag that they have to sell. They have to get a quota on or they don't get paid. So they're not going to pull Garrison Brothers out because there's no incentive for them to do so unless they're just equally proud of the brand like we are. And we've been very successful in that regard as well. People love to sell Garrison Brothers if they work for a distributor because it's an easy sell.
Cool.
Excellent.
So I know you've got a hard out coming up here pretty quick, so I wanted to try to squeeze in a couple more questions. What has been the biggest change you've seen in Austin since you've lived here, other than traffic?
So I used to joke that Austin was never going to be weird enough for me. The whole, all the characters and the celebrities and the weirdness. I mean, our politicians, our culture, our bars, our artists, our TV shows. Austin has so many crazy, cool things happening there. And I've always said that it's not weird enough. It's still not weird enough for me, but you know what? It's weird enough for me now. And I'd rather be in high Texas making bourbon than I would be on the streets of Austin today because, frankly, I'm afraid I'll get run over by one of those
scooters
all over the place. Austin has grown so much, and you got to give a lot of credit to our political leaders in the 70s and 80s and 90s for making it what it is today. Now it's an economic powerhouse. I mean, we've got cranes on 15 buildings downtown today, and it just feeds on itself. And my biggest fear is that we're going to ruin that by not taking care of the city. The homeless situation is completely out of control, and nobody seems to really be taking a hard stand doing something about it. Crime is up, and it's up for a reason, and everybody knows what it is, but nobody wants to talk about it. And that kind of pisses me off. I used to feel very safe in Austin. I've never locked my doors in Austin, but I've got people coming into my backyard and going to the restroom in my backyard. And I don't know who they are or where they came from, but we got to do something about that, or this COVID thing is it's going to become a real threat if it stretches to the homeless population, and who knows how you control it after that. So
Yeah.
I'm scared for Austin, to be honest. I love Austin. I love Austin so much, but I'm scared for Austin right now.
Well, speaking of weird, what is the weirdest thing you've seen since you've lived in Austin?
The weirdest thing I've seen. I was working at a bank building on the 4th floor downtown at the intersection of 6th Street and I guess it's Guadalupe. It had some, yeah. And so I'm working in this bank building, and I get off work at the end of the day. And this was actually when I was in college. I was doing an internship with a law firm, and I walked out, and I'm in my suit and tie. I was always dressed up for the damn job. And I walk outside, and 300 bicycles go past me, and everybody on the bicycle is completely naked.
And
I went, I love this town. Where else you get to see that?
Yeah. No, that's a lot of fun. I mean, that's definitely one of the advantages of living here is you'll see something every once in a while that's just, wow, that just blew my mind.
Yep.
So lastly, we'll finish up with this question. If somebody were to want to move to Austin, what advice would you give them other than don't?
You took the words right out of my mouth. Have a trust fund.
And drink a lot of Garrison.
Have a trust fund. I don't understand it. These apartments downtown and these condos downtown, they're renting for $4,000 a month.
Yeah.
$4,000. How do you, if you're 23 years old or 24 years old and just entering the workforce, how can you justify that unless you have a pretty nice trust fund?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think that's going to be one of the interesting things about this COVID thing is where are people going to live because they don't want to live tightly packed together anymore. And it looks, you don't have a choice here.
Yeah. It's scary. It's frightening. And the devastation that this situation, this pandemic is wreaking on the restaurant industry right now. I have so many friends of mine who are bartenders that I've met through the liquor business, and so many of them are out of work right now. And many of them are literally living in a camper parked up in Colorado or at some state park, just trying to survive. And I fear for them because so many young people are in the restaurant business, and they're not being taken care of right now. Yeah,
that's a shame. Well, Dan, I appreciate you spending some time with us. I want to let you be respectful and let you get to your dinner plans. Enjoy the rest of your stay up in Colorado. We're jealous of the temperatures.
Yeah, it's nice and cool up here. I think it's like 62 outside. I'm just rubbing it in. You know that, right?
Thank you. That sucks. But
Joel, good to talk to you. Bob, great to talk to you. Thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you,
No
Dan.
problem. Thank you. And Bye-bye. We'll see you next time on the Trail to Austin.